Good morning. So Prince Harry's case against the Mail on Sunday and the Daily Mail has begun. Opening arguments have concluded, and Prince Harry is expected to give evidence quite soon. As you would expect, both sides are full of bluff and bluster, as I like to call it. The Mail on Sunday and the Daily Mail, their lawyer is saying the other side have no case. It's all clutching at straws and all speculation, and there's no real evidence. Harry's side says that his phone was hacked and illegal information gathering happened. Of course, it's not just against Prince Harry. You've got other notable figures like Sir Elton John, Liz Hurley, and so there's seven claimants. And that's one of the difficulties that the newspapers face, is that there's multiple claimants and they're talking about 50 different newspaper articles. So just on the numbers game, it might be that the judge might have a doubt on one or two of the articles, and that will be enough to tip it in the favor of Harry and his camp, because of course it's a civil case, not a criminal case, so it's not beyond reasonable doubt. The standard of proof is on the balance of probabilities. So is it more likely than not? It's just basically Harry's camp has to prove 51%. So, if you were doing exams at school and you got 51%, that wouldn't be great. But here, all they have to do is prove 51%. It's just slightly more likely that their side is true. Now, of course, there's been in the news the issue of this Gavin Burrows. He was one of the private investigators who apparently initially said that he had worked for these two newspapers and done illegal information gathering. But then in 2023, he withdrew that statement and he said, I never made that statement. The one that's been attributed to me in the press is not one of mine. I didn't say that. I didn't sign that. I don't recognize it. The wording used is not my wording. And so now the Harry's side have got a big problem, because this guy is now no longer backing up what they claim he previously said. And so, of course, the newspapers' lawyers are very excited about this, and they want to cross-examine Gavin Burrows. They want him on the stand, they want to be able to ask him questions, and they want to be able to cross-examine him. Harry's lawyers have said, no. He gave his statement. He shouldn't be allowed to add anything to that. And the fact that the newspaper's lawyers want to question him is they just want to call into doubt his credibility. Of course they want to call into doubt his credibility. That's the whole point of cross-examination. So the Harry's lawyers are saying, oh, well, you have to take his first statement as true, and you can't take anything that he says now as true, which is rubbish. The court will want to get as much information as possible from this man, and his recent statements are going to be important as well. And they will want an explanation from him as to what he did, who he worked for, that kind of thing. So the newspapers are saying that they didn't have, they are a legitimate business. They don't have bags of cash lying around that they can just, pay people off to go and do illegal things for them. Whereas Harry's camp is saying that's exactly what happened. People were just given wads of cash to do all these illegal things. So one of the stories that is going to cause difficulty for the newspapers is the story about Chelsea Davy going on a flight, and apparently they were able to confirm that she was on the flight, but also her seat number. So if that is actually shown by evidence that they published her seat number, that is that's a very difficult thing for the newspapers to explain how they got that information. So the newspapers are saying, well, we just asked somebody at the airport and they gave us that information, and yes, we paid them some money, but it's not unusual to pay sources. But whether or not obtaining that seat number is illegal, that is a problem for the newspaper. And once one illegal action is proved, the court's going to be more inclined to believe the newspapers. So that issue there is very problematic for the newspaper's case. Harry's side have decided to attack particularly two journalists. One is Katie Nicholl, which I'm surprised about, because Katie Nicholl most recently has done a lot of puff pieces for Harry and Meghan. She's come out a lot in support of Harry and Meghan. She's told a lot of stories benefiting Harry and Meghan, and a lot of negative press towards Prince William and Princess Catherine. So I'm surprised that they're going after her. But then they're also going after Rebecca English. Now, you might know her name because she was in the papers recently when Meghan's father, Thomas Markle Sr., had his leg amputated in the Philippines around Christmas time or just before Christmas. And Meghan famously refused to contact him and refused to. Finally, she sent him a letter via embassy staff, and basically the letter said, "I don't trust you. I'm not having anything to do with you because you speak to the reporters." And when all of this was going on, Rebecca English, the newspaper reporter, was actually at Thomas's bedside because she had reported on various stories over the years, and she had become friendly with Thomas Markle. And when he had this medical emergency, he called her and he said, "I can't go through this by myself." And he asked her to come and be at his bedside. So there's that link between the Markles and Rebecca English. But of course, this case is going back 20 years ago, well before the Markles ever entered the picture. So I can understand why Harry might and Meghan might have asked their lawyers to make a big meal of Rebecca English because they want to ruin her. They don't like her. Both journalists, Katie Nicholl and Rebecca English, say they can tell you who their sources for those articles are. Now, they might not be able to remember every single source for every single article because obviously they write a lot of articles. But for example, information to do with the relationship between Chelsea Davy and Harry, which Harry's very sensitive about, Rebecca English says, well, I'm on the periphery of those social circles, and so I know people who know Harry, and those people told me. They've also been, they're going to be saying, they've actually named the sources, which is quite unusual, but they've named the sources for certain pieces of information. And Harry's team has said, oh, well, isn't that convenient? These people that you're naming, they dead. Well, no, actually, it's not convenient for the newspaper's side, because if the people weren't dead, they could call them as witnesses. So it's very inconvenient for them that they did. But that was the social circle and some of the source of the information. So, for example, I think it was to do with Archie's godfather or something. No, must have been well before that. It was something. I can't remember. Some piece of social information. So you have this very strange situation in this case where the journalists basically have to justify all of the things that they've managed to, the pieces of information they've managed to obtain. Now, one of the things that Harry's case is relying heavily on is the payment for information. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Journalists do it all the time. You pay sources for information. There's nothing nefarious about it unless you know that other person has done something illegal. So, for example, the information about Chelsea Davies' seat number. Certainly in these days, that would be highly illegal. It would be a breach of confidentiality. But I don't know what the laws were then, whether releasing that information would have been illegal at that time. I don't know. But it's a very strong point that they have in their favor. That's Harry's case, Harry's side. And of course, the court is going to have to go through every single article, every single allegation, and see what evidence there is on both sides. And I think it's very difficult to prove a negative. It's difficult to prove you did not do something wrong. So even where there might have been 3 or 4 friends of Harry's who were perhaps providing information, I can see why the journalists might not want to provide those names because they might still be sources for them. And of course, in the journalistic world, once you burn your source, you're no longer considered to be a journalist of integrity. So the journalists here are put in a very difficult position. So from what we've seen so far, the other defense that the 2 newspapers have got is that it's just simply too long ago. Okay, well, firstly, it's too long ago, and a lot of information has been lost to time. That people don't keep notes on every single article you did 20 years ago. So there's that, which is doesn't really help. It just shows that it's difficult for them to prove their case. But the other thing is, there's a statute of limitations. Basically, if you've been harmed by these journalists putting forward information from illegal sources, then you have 6 years within which to sue the newspapers. And I just said a minute ago that it had been 20 years. And so what happened was some of these articles were republished on an online news website. And some of the claimants said, oh, we didn't see the original articles. We only became aware of it when it was republished. How convenient that is. And so then the 6-year period needs to run from that republication date. Now, personally, with my 30 years legal experience, I think that is a ridiculous argument to be running, because how can they can't prove that. They can just say that, and how convenient to them that they can revive the case. I mean, if you can just say that, then the statute of limitations becomes meaningless. So for my mind, if I was the judge, I would have wanted exceptionally strong evidence on that point, and I don't think they did have it. Anyway, so that point has been raised as a preliminary issue again in this hearing. When it comes to this court case, I don't think the judge is going to say, oh, you're out of time, and make a decision on that basis, because that point has already been argued. They had some pre-trial arguments last year, might even have been the year before, where they argued on that particular point, and the judge said, well, no, they didn't accept that the statute of limitations had run out. They accepted that the 6-year period would run from the republication date, and so people were within time. So one of the other things, if I were acting for the newspapers against Harry, one of the things that I would be looking for is I'd be going back and seeing, did he make any comments about any of these articles at the time? Because, he's hot-headed. So, and any of the claimants, did any of the claimants, go on TV, argue against it, complain about it? Because then the 6-year limitation would be able to be proved. They'd be able to say, well, they did know about it back there 20 years ago, and in fact, they commented about it. So that would be something helpful, but I'm sure the lawyers would have thought of that, and if that existed, I'm sure they would have put that forward. I wonder if they've gone through Harry's book with a fine-tooth comb to see if anything there might help them prove the date at which he became aware of it. So, he might have said, oh, they knew what seat Chelsea was on, and that made me angry, and I don't know, we spoke about it for the next day or something like that. Then that would prove the date at which he knew it. But yeah, in this case, that ship has already sailed. I know the lawyers for the newspapers needed to just put that forward, but the court would not have let this case get to the point that it's got to on the eve of the first few days of a 9-week hearing, which is massive, if they could have avoided it by ruling that the statute of limitations had already expired. The fact is that ship has sailed. Anyway, I will keep you updated. Please let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for watching, and go safely wherever you are.